Welcome to our event. Let's go to the next slide, Jared. And I just wanted to give you a moment to take a look at this amazing photo, which actually represents our theme tonight, and also lists our sponsors. We want to start by thanking our international sponsors listed here at the bottom. Of course, my chat window is blocking their name. So Planet and TMS Lighting are international sponsors, and we have a sponsor tonight, a bronze level sponsor, Wilson Art. Thank you very much for your support. And I'm proud to say CRTKL, my professional home, is a platinum level sponsor again for RDI, and we would love to thank all of our sponsors before we begin. And we are here to talk tonight about circularity in retail, where things come from and where they go. It's a new year, and we are really happy to start the new year off with an event focused on this really important topic, not just for retail, but for the whole design and construction industry, not to mention the world, and that is sustainable design. I forgot to say who I am. My name is Lucy Baracchio. I am the president of the Pacific Northwest chapter of RDI. And in my day job, I am a principal at CRTKL and a head of retail in our Seattle office, and also the office director in Seattle. So I'm going to do a quick review of our agenda for tonight. So I think it's on the next slide. And you'll see that we have a few minutes up here to make a few opening remarks, and our vice president of the chapter will also talk a little bit after I finish up here. Then we'll have a presentation for 45 to 50 minutes with our featured speakers, who I will introduce in a few minutes. We'll have some time for questions and answers, and then there will be some breakout room time. So you'll have time to network, maybe talk about what you heard tonight, anything you learned, or just say hello to people you might know now or might have yet to meet. So we do have that time built in, and then we'll come back together for a few minutes to wrap up. So hopefully you all can stay with us for the whole thing. There are some fun surprises along the way. And if you looked at your invite, there are prizes involved. So please stick around for that. Now, I just want to say that along the theme of our event for tonight, we in the Pacific Northwest have really experienced firsthand some of the damaging effects of climate change. And as contributors to this built environment that we all work in, we as retail designers have a key role in redirecting the way we work and the way things are built. So the more we learn about how we can minimize that damage to the environment that is happening every day, the better we can do in creating a more sustainable future. So I'm really excited about tonight's event, and I'm really glad that you made the time to be here. So looking forward for the rest of the year, we can go to the next slide and we'll get a sneak peek at our chapter's upcoming events. So next month, you'll see here that we are going to hear about a thing called Treat. And that, if you haven't heard about it, is a new concept by Express Spa, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. And that's going to be really great to see. It's a brand new thing that just opened in the JFK airport. And then next month, in March, we will have an event in collaboration with the Northern California chapter, which is very exciting. We may be continuing on the theme of health and wellness in retail. More to come on that. Very exciting. And we are hoping that we'll be able to have a little bit of an in-person component to it, depending on how things go. But we will be planning also to have a virtual aspect, so some of our remote members and other guests can continue to attend virtually. I think that's going to be the way of the world for a while. So please join us for that. And I do want to mention a couple of other themes that we are going to be highlighting in the year ahead after March. We are planning some exciting things around diversity, inclusion, and equity, and also tying that back into the retail design industry. We have an annual event around emerging designers that will be happening in April, and that's always a popular flagship event of ours. And then we will be highlighting local retailers and hopefully collaborating with other RDI chapters, which is becoming easier now that we're all virtual, and that is a great benefit of participating in these events. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Toby Ray to talk about membership.
All right, thank you, Lucy. So hi, everybody. I'm Toby Ray. I'm proud to be your VP for this chapter. I see some new names and faces on this list, so I would just like to say that, give you a little bit about what retail design is all about, and hopefully encourage some of you who may not be members to become members. Here at the Retail Design Institute, we are, of course, about all things retail. We promote and want to move our industry forward through these events, collaboration, and networking. We welcome individuals from all across the industry, which makes for an exciting and diverse organization. We focus, like Lucy said, on things like education, mentorship, career building, networking, all kinds of trends in retail, best practices in brand, visual merchandising, and store design. There are several membership options available. You can check out our website at retaildesigninstitute.org, but you can also please feel free to reach out to myself or any of us on the board. We would all be happy to walk you through the different membership options and find out what the best fit might be for you. Some include things like professional, allied, trade members, educators, students, and media. And then in addition to membership, I also just wanted to shout out sponsorship. I have had the pleasure of bringing on several new sponsors over the past year. Some of you are on this call. Thank you very much. We could not pull off all of these amazing events we do without your support. Of course, tonight we want to do another special shout out to Wilson Art, who's our event sponsor. A huge thank you to our platinum sponsor, CRTKL, international sponsors, Planet Construction, and TMS Lighting. If you are someone on the line interested in becoming a sponsor, or you know someone else who might be interested, please reach out to me or again, anyone else on the board, and we would be happy to go over different options. There's a wide range of ways you can support, anything as small as a raffle prize donation, swag bag gifts, that sort of thing, all the way up through international level sponsorship. So again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our sponsors and members. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Astrid for our first raffle of the night.
Thank you, Toby. Hi, everybody. For our first raffle, we have a $50 gift card for your local construction salvage store, sponsored by Wilson Art. So let's see who is the winner. Little papers. And the winner is Flavia BC.
Can you hear me? Yes, I'm here.
Yay,
Flavia!
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm in California, though. Does that count?
Yes, it does.
Yes, we will
Okay.
find something for you.
And hi, Lucy. Hi.
Hi, ciao, Flavia.
Martin,
¿Cómo
ciao,
estás?
ciao,
Nice
ciao,
to see
ciao.
you. Nice to hear you.
Well, now I will pass it back to Lucy for tonight's event introduction.
Thank you. Gracias, Astrid. That's very good. Thank you. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you our featured speakers for tonight. You see them here on the slide. They're smiling faces. They are two of my favorite colleagues at CRTKL and really powerhouses, experts in sustainable design. So let me introduce Yarden first. Yarden Harari is a licensed architect specializing in sustainability and social responsibility at CRTKL. She works very hard to raise awareness towards circular and inclusive economies in the built environment through her work in material reuse, including CRTKL's first collab on zero waste in retail, the All for Reuse initiative, and collaborative mapping efforts. Yarden is a rock star. She was recognized this in 2021 as a DFC Emerging Leader and an ICSC Center Build Leader Under 40 for her ongoing contributions in the industry. So please welcome Yarden. Yay, Yarden. And Joey Michelle Hutchison, also an architect and sustainable design leader at CRTKL. She has over 20 years of experience, has worked on projects all around the globe at all phases of design and construction, from feasibility analysis through construction administration. She's passionate about connecting sustainability to brands, and she develops sustainable design standards that are aligned with brand identity for global retail clients. She also leads corporate greenhouse gas emissions reporting and project energy and carbon reporting at CRTKL. So please welcome Joy Michelle. And I just want to say what I appreciate most about these two ladies is not just their amazing playlist, which I think Joy Michelle really put that playlist together. That, you guys, we need to post that somewhere because I want it. And then, but beyond your musical taste, I think, you know, what I really do appreciate about both of you is your way of bringing sustainability to life for normal people. Like, you can make it accessible, you know how to talk about it in real language that we understand, and make it easy to implement in our day-to-day work. So I'm really excited to have you here. I'm going to hand it over to both of you, and we'll talk at the end with everyone with questions and answers. And I do want to invite everyone to just put your questions in the chat as they come up, and we will get to them at the end. Okay, handing it over to you.
Okay, so you should be able to see my screen, right? Okay, awesome. So I'm Yarden. It's really great to be here and share with you.
I'm Joey Michelle. It's great to be here as well. And thank you, Lucy, for that introduction.
Yeah, so humbling. So we'll share a little bit about our agenda today for circularity in retail. We'll start with an issue overview and kind of introduction, talk about embodied carbon and zero waste, and then lead into a couple supportive resources and opportunities in design, and then some Q&A. A couple of things we hope that you will take away from this will be to be able to articulate the impact of building materials on embodied carbon and waste reduction and social equity, demonstrate a couple pathways for existing materials, and really determining some of the leverage points that we have within our own roles. And then thinking about which product types might start to lend themselves best toward circular economy and deconstruction and reuse.
So starting with the big picture, why are we talking about this? Well, 2021 brought home more than ever that the impacts of climate change are really here now, from the California wildfires, which are now nearly constant, and we've seen the two worst seasons on record in a row, 2020 and 2021, to the unprecedented heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, to the winter storms in Texas, which caused over 2 weeks of statewide power outages and food and water shortages, and led to a death toll of over 246. We've seen devastating effects of climate change. And it's easy to proceed with business as usual in our lives and work, but we know that the impacts of that can be truly devastating.
So when we think about retail, you know, we design beautiful spaces and wonderful experience for customers, but how can we start to think about some of the things that we don't see? This presentation is going to have a bunch of GIFs and some serious information because that's what the last 2 years have done to us. But really, we're going to start thinking about what are some of these impacts beyond the walls of the retail environments that we're building. So a nice adage in the sustainability world is that the greenest building is the one that's already built. And that's measured in its longevity, timelessness, and durability. And through having a long life, a loose fit, and low energy, it really kind of facilitates that adaptation. But a lot of times in retail, that's often in conflict with the idea that the hardest thing in fashion is not to be known for a logo, but to be known for a silhouette. And I want to take this moment for you to kind of picture a store that either you've designed or you've been in. You don't need to see the logo, you don't need to see the products inside. Just by the furniture that's in there, by the way that it's laid out, you know what store you're in. And that's a challenge because the brand identity really is embedded in the finishes. It's really part of the store being a way that the brand tells its story. And it's kind of that perfect fit. But it's also changing, and it changes all the time with all the events. And you can see how the evolution of stores follow the evolution of the brand. And that's what makes it exciting, and it's relevant and innovative, and it brings new ideas into our culture. But historically, that's also what creates some externalized issues. So some of the issues that happen at the source, mining these materials that are needed for all the different uses, but they disrupt ecosystems and habitats somewhere far away. Limited resources often have geopolitical implications and put pressures on local communities. And we know that toxic chemicals in manufacturing and any kind of other kind of devastating processes that you can see, of the extraction are disproportionately located near communities of color and low-income communities. And the same can be said for issues at the end. So starting off with the hard news, but there is good news too. And what we've seen in retail across the board and across the world is that goals are starting to be embedded in the strategy. And many retailers are starting to take actions and build out roadmaps for addressing the climate change. And while many are figuring it out in their direct supply chains and products, it's a bit of a challenge to figure out how this starts to play out in some of the indirect inputs. Scope 3 is one of those things that you'll hear Joy and Michelle talking about related to embodied carbon, because that's how this starts to play out in our built environment and in the kind of upstream and downstream pieces of our portfolios. So we'll go back to basics a little bit and think about what the key questions are when we're thinking about materials. And really that's, what are they made of? What does it take to make them? Where do they come from? I changed this from singular to plural and now I see the typos. But where do they come from, and how do they come together? How long will they last, and where will they go? So we'll start with the first couple of questions, and I'll hand it over to Joy and Michelle to talk about embodied carbon.
So first of all, why is it important that we talk about this within our industry? The buildings are responsible for 40% of global CO2 emissions annually, and that includes both building operations and building materials and construction, which is the embodied carbon that we are going to focus on in this presentation. And that includes both new construction. So by 2060, the global building floor area is expected to double. And that is the equivalent of adding an entire New York City to the world every month for 40 years. And it also includes existing buildings. So by 2040, 2/3 of the global building stock will be buildings that exist today. So we need to consider those existing buildings and decarbonize those as well in order to meet global climate goals. And this past year in July, Architecture 2030 accelerated the 2030 challenge to be the 2021 challenge to focus on the importance of decarbonizing buildings today and designing buildings to meet zero carbon targets today in order to meet global carbon goals. So we're going to start with some basic concepts around carbon and greenhouse gases. And these involve a lot of math. So we're going to try to keep it simple and focus on the basic concepts that we need to understand embodied carbon as we move forward and look at materials, and what we need to understand the impact of the materials that we are choosing to include in the projects that we design. So starting with greenhouse gases, what are greenhouse gases? Greenhouse gases are any gas that traps heat within the Earth's atmosphere. So this includes carbon dioxide, which is what we typically think of as a greenhouse gas. And carbon dioxide is created when we burn fossil fuels, but it also includes methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases like hydrofluorocarbons, those are refrigerants, and also sulfur hexafluoride. And then global warming potential is the warming influence that each of these gases has over a set period of time relative to carbon dioxide. And that global warming potential is different for each one. So for instance, methane has 21 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. The hydrofluorocarbon gases have 6,500 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. So when we talk about the embodied carbon of a material, we're not talking just about the carbon dioxide, we're talking about the CO2 equivalent or the carbon dioxide equivalent so that we can capture the impact of all of those greenhouse gases. And when the way that we calculate that carbon dioxide equivalent is to capture the global warming potential of all those greenhouse gases as they would apply to the equivalency of carbon. So for instance, 21 pounds of CO2e, because methane, for instance, has 21 times the global warming potential of carbon. 21 pounds of CO2e could be 1 pound of methane, or it could be 21 pounds of carbon dioxide. So those are some basics that it's important to understand just as we go forward, so that when you are looking at the information on a specific product, that you understand the units that you're looking at and how to calculate the impact of a specific material. Now we'll look at how buildings emit greenhouse gases. And they emit greenhouse gases through operational carbon, which is what we would typically think of as far as a building's carbon footprint. And that is the carbon involved in the production of electricity to power the building, and then also HVAC systems, and then water supply, heating, and treatment. And then also the embodied carbon, which is the GHG emissions from those building materials. And that is the GHG emissions involved in creating those materials from the extraction of the raw material all the way through the end of life of the product. So in this diagram for concrete, for instance, the embodied carbon of concrete includes extracting the raw materials involved to make the cement, transporting those materials to the cement manufacturing facility, transporting that cement to the mixing plant, along with all the other components of the concrete, then transporting that concrete to the job site, and at the end of life of the project, either recycling that concrete or disposing of that concrete. And then a combination of embodied concrete, of embodied carbon and operational carbon make up the total carbon footprint of a project. And embodied carbon is locked in when the building is built, whereas operational carbon builds up over time as the building is operated. And it also can be reduced over time. If the building operates more efficiently over time, then the amount of operational carbon per year can be reduced over time. And the primary driver of embodied carbon is structure based on the weight and mass of the structural system compared to other building components. And also a traditional structure of concrete or steel would be made of carbon intensive materials. However, in a building type such as retail, which is renovated frequently, those renovations over time will increase the embodied carbon such that the footprint of multiple renovations can end up equaling the initial embodied carbon of the core and shell. And then another thing that's important to understand when we look at the overall embodied carbon of a project is biogenic carbon. And this is the carbon that's sequestered in natural materials such as wood. And this is a negative number because it reduces the overall embodied carbon. So forests are a carbon sink, and they because of the carbon that is stored within the wood and within the forest. However, that sequestered carbon is lost if that wood is burned upon demolition. As soon as that wood is burned, that carbon is released into the atmosphere. So for that reason, it's important to be aware of local forestry regulations and also to consider FSC certification so that we can be assured that when the wood for the product that we're specifying is harvested, that it is being replaced with new trees that are being planted within that forest so that the carbon sink of that forest can be maintained, and also to design for reuse. For instance, specify mechanical fasteners versus glues so that that product can be reused and the carbon sequestered within that wood can be, that sequestration can be maintained. So how do we, now that we've talked about what embodied carbon is, how do we go about measuring it? So there's a few different tools that we can use to measure embodied carbon. The first would be environmental product declarations, or EPDs. And these are documents that can be product specific or industry-wide. For instance, there are industry-wide EPDs for gypsum board manufactured in North America, and also for some wood products manufactured in North America. And these are documents that that show you the life cycle analysis of products. And that life cycle analysis is divided up into different stages, from stage A1, which is the raw material extraction, all the way through C4, which is the product disposal, and then sometimes even D, which is reuse and recovery. And all EPDs will cover product stages A1 through A3, which is the raw material extraction through manufacturing. Not all EPDs will go beyond that. So if you're comparing products, for instance, it's important to make sure that the information that you're comparing covers the same product stages. So this is a screenshot of an example EPD, and EPDs are going to be your best source of product-specific data, and you can get a wide range of product data from EPDs, and they're great for product comparisons and also for doing manual calculations. They do, however, include a lot of information, so they can be overwhelming, and there's no specific standard format for EPDs. So for instance, in this particular document, the enlarged area that we've shown, what you would be looking for in this particular document is the global warming potential for this particular product, which is a print wrap. And this shows that for product stages A1 through A3, that 360 kilograms of CO2e is the total embodied carbon for this particular product, and the unit for this is 1 roll of this particular wrap. And some other tools that are available include EC3, and this is a free database. It just requires that you set up an account, and you can compare different materials within this, and this aggregates the data that is included in the EPDs. So you don't have to search through the EPDs to look for the data. The tool has already done that for you. So you can, for instance, look for, if you want to look for the carbon footprint of gypsum board or acoustical ceiling panels or structural steel, you can use this tool to find that information. And it's much, much more user-friendly than manually looking for data from an EPD. There are also software such as Tally or OneClick that you can use with a Revit model to run a life cycle analysis. So now we're going to look at a few product comparisons and calculations using EC3 and also some EPDs. And we're going to use the Tempur-Pedic flagship store in New York as an example. So what's in a store that we might want to look at? There are lots of things we can study, including flooring, ceiling, walls, light fixtures, doors, millwork and furniture, electrical outlets, equipment, ductwork, and many more. We're just going to take a few elements of this particular project to look at as examples. So the first thing we're going to look at is the interior partitions. So doing some rough calculations of the interior partition area, just looking at the steel stud area and the gypsum board using EC3, we get a range of possible carbon footprints. And the reason for this is EC3 is taking all of the data that's available for steel studs and gypsum board manufactured in North America. And the range is because of a difference in recycled content for those products, and also a difference in the energy used at the manufacturing facilities. For instance, some may be using more renewable energy than other facilities, and that will impact the carbon footprint of those particular products. So this highlights the importance of specifying products with a high percentage of recycled content, for instance. So the carbon footprint of the steel studs for the interior, just the interior partitions in this project, are around between 970 and 1,535 kilograms of CO2e, and the gypsum board between 615 and 1,286 kilograms, for a total of between 1,585 and 2,921 kilograms. So if we take the larger number in that range, the 2,921, that amount of carbon would be equal to what it would take to charge over 350,000 smartphones, or the emissions that would be created from driving a passenger vehicle over 7,300 miles. To sequester that amount of carbon, we would need to plant 48 trees and grow them for 10 years. And to avoid that amount of emissions, we would need to take 124 bags of trash and recycle them rather than having them go to landfill. Now we'll take a look at the ceiling materials. This particular project has acoustical ceiling panels, gypboard ceiling, and some solid wood slats. So looking at the gypsum board and the acoustical ceiling panels, considering only the finished material, not the ceiling grid or the structural support, the gypsum board is 0.83 to 1.73 kilograms per square foot. The acoustical ceiling panels are 0.7 to 1.85. And again, that range is because of the difference in recycled content between different products, and also potentially the difference in the amount of renewable energy, for instance, used at the manufacturing facilities. And then the solid wood slats have a negative number for the embodied carbon, and that's because of the biogenic carbon, that is sequestered within the wood. However, even though this is a great number in terms of embodied carbon and will help the project's overall embodied carbon footprint, this doesn't help in terms of eliminating potential for waste. So that's something to consider. We would still need to look at what would happen to that particular product at end of life of the store. If we had an open ceiling, we have no carbon footprint and we have no product that we have to figure out what to do with at the end of life of the store. And then we'll take a look at the floor. We've got some vinyl tile, we've got ceramic tile, and we've got wood. The vinyl tile is on average 1.57 kilograms CO2e per square foot. Ceramic tile is a little less at 1.06. And the wood, again, is a negative number at minus 1.3 kilograms. And again, some considerations with wood would be to look at FSC certification to make sure that the product is harvested responsibly. End of life control, consider details that are mechanically fastened rather than glued down so that that wood flooring can be reused, and consider reclaimed wood as well rather than specifying a new wood product. And generally speaking, the less processing a material requires and the closer a material is to its natural state, the lower the carbon footprint is likely to be. So some general tips to reduce embodied carbon on a project: minimize the overall material quantity. The less materials you have, the less opportunity you have for embodied carbon. Maximize the recycled content. The fewer virgin materials, the less carbon you're likely to have. Consider salvaged materials to reduce the amount of new materials on the project. Use local materials. What we've looked at when we looked at the product stage, we were only considering through the manufacturing process and not the life cycle stage that would be transporting the materials from the manufacturing facility to the project site. But that is an important element to consider. So the more local materials we can use, the better in terms of the project carbon footprint. Use materials that aren't highly processed and that are close to their natural state, and look for products with EPDs so that we can validate and verify the carbon footprint of the materials.
So now what? What do we do as we start to understand the order of magnitude and how this really starts to add up? The reason that it also is critical in retail is that retail lifespans are especially short, right? We build things up and we tear down the stores, and that contributes to these kind of inconceivable global numbers of raw material extraction, which 50% of that goes towards buildings, and annual waste that's estimated to grow to 2.2 billion tons per year by 2025. So as you heard from Joe and Michelle, at every stage of that process, there are associated emissions and different greenhouse gases potentially released into the atmosphere. And when it comes down to it, that really just feels like we are just throwing money away and letting it evaporate. And that also exacerbates the social impact because this affects people at every stage. It means that there's potentially unequal access to resources. There are people living in fence line and frontline communities. And alternately, there are also people whose livelihood depends on how things work today. But there's also decision makers that can start to help change that. And as design professionals, we're likely some mix of more than one of those. So we do have power that we can harness to start to make change. And now just to think about some of the physical material impact and the actual amount of kind of stuff that might be coming out of a project from just a single fit out. So these are 4 examples of kind of recent stores, each a different size. And what you can start to see is that the size of the store doesn't actually necessarily correlate to the amount of tons of waste created. And much of that depends on, was it a densely kind of packed construction when it might be a smaller store than a larger scale? Was it an initial fit out or a renovation of an existing space? And what's amazing is you can see these are super high diversion rates, which just means the material was either recycled, salvaged, or reused. But in this case, most of it was recycled, and there's potentially opportunity to keep those materials intact rather than have to take them to get processed. And just a kind of fun exercise that you could try next time you're working on a job that's under construction, whether it's LEED or not, ask your GC to gather and send you their waste tickets. You might even be able to find out the cost of tipping fees and start to just get the big picture of how much it actually costs just to throw these things away or even to recycle them. And just to show that in pounds, this is still so much material. I don't know if pounds means anything at this number anymore, but there is more that we can do with the products that we're finding in the spaces that we're coming into or that we're fitting out. And so if we want to do less math or try to keep it simpler, we have to start figuring out how to work with what we have, right? What would we do if we just never had to source a new material or we never had to send anything to landfill? And the way that we start to get there is through closing the loop and bringing these materials into our designs by sourcing for reuse, designing our details for disassembly so that we're setting up future us for success, and then deconstruct to create that supply for new projects when we're going into existing spaces. And that can help keep that resource, all those physical resources and the wealth that comes out of that within our communities and our cities. So to create some new pathways, you know, what if we just went way beyond recycling and start to proactively identify some new pathways for all the different products that we work with? They might be different depending on what they are or where we are working, but we're going to start to think about some of that now. And back to picking on our retail RDI store of the year, because this was just built, we have, let's say, at least a decade before maybe it has to relocate it or the concept of what a store is may change. So we have some time to plan ahead and think about where all these amazing materials could go, because it's full of nice things and we would not want to let those things go to waste. So we'll start by looking at just what could potentially happen with some of the specialty items that might be in a store. And these are some of the furniture or the light fixtures or some of the equipment and appliances that might be able to get just reused as they are. They're kind of high value and manageable, and they're not necessarily part of the kind of core construction of the store itself. And so they're easier to detach and then reattach somewhere else. So these might be things that the owner or the brand actually just wants to keep, and they send it to their warehouse and then they apply it in a new store. The other option might be sending these or donating them to a local reuse retailer so that they can kind of market them. It's theirs to then resell into a new site, whether that's a school, office, a home, you name it. And that's the idea, is that there's still versatility in where these products can end up. And maybe they're posted on an online platform, raising that awareness beyond just who might already know about these materials. And they might need to have a hauler send those things to the physical retailer or directly to the site of the future. And then there's some of the high value commodities. Joy and Michelle talked a lot about wood, both in terms of its embodied carbon and biogenic carbon that's of high value that we would not want to see burn. And also just because it's a material that's so universally loved, right? It's so adaptable and flexible and is kind of always something that is kind of naturally we're attracted to as humans. But these are some of the materials that are more fixed, right? And they might take a little bit more to detach them from the space that they're installed in. And they might take some refabrication or adaptation to fit into whatever new site they're going to go in. So here we might look at having a deconstruction contractor come in. Maybe that's the future of what demolition contractors are. But for now, it's been a specialty, right? And they might have that go to a hauler that can go directly to a new site. There's some business models for that. Or they might get it to a community hub that kind of serves as both a refabricator, a maker space, and a retailer. They might send that to a refabricator that then sends it over to someone who might aggregate this until they have enough quantity. to then be able to redistribute it to projects in the future. The alternative might be having a craftsperson. Maybe that's the millwork, the installer, the ceiling installer, come back in and take out what they know best. And they might be able to take that right to a future site, or they might be able to send it back to the manufacturer. Kind of lots of opportunities where you can start to see these are just some ideas, but you could start to mix and match some of these different pathways. And then there are some of the universal components that show up on any job site, right? You have studs, we have ductwork, electrical outlets, which might run $100 to $200 each one. And so those things really start to add up. And so here there might be an opportunity for maybe the landlord to keep these in a backstock for future tenant fit outs. Alternately, maybe there's another kind of hauler to an aggregator that goes back to a manufacturer take back program before they send it back to a new site. There might be kind of aspects of wanting this to get verified and having a warranty on these products to know that they're still good for putting into a new installation and that they're going to be functional and that they're going to perform as they need to. And then there's still always the option of recycling. But the thing is that if we are able to separate a lot of these products, and these are the ones that are mostly made with just one or two materials, and so they are that much more recyclable, we can be even more effective with the things that we do eventually send to recycling. And then another model that might work for certain products like these is the idea of someone who's kind of a loop closer in themselves, where they kind of do it all. They'll come in, uninstall, store, quality control, and then kind of turn back around and provide the service of reinstallation. And so all this to say is that there are lots of different options that we could start to think about to kind of have variations in how we handle materials. And these pathways obviously go way beyond the scope of the typical project team. And so if we're trying to source and change where we send materials, then we are going to have to figure out how to essentially recreate and layer onto our existing supply chains. And some of these changes might be the familiar partners that we do work with. They might be the craftspeople or the trades that come back to uninstall what they know. Or as I mentioned, maybe the demolition contractor gets trained in deconstruction. And some might be entirely new business models that just start to fill in the current gaps that we don't even know about today. And those kind of loosely map into these different categories that kind of complement each other and what we'll need to grow in parallel to really establish a more circular economy. No discipline can do this alone, and these are some of the ones that help complement what we do as designers, architects, or contractors, or owners, and start to be able to make this real. So reuse suppliers might help kind of supply the used or fabricated building materials. Deconstruction organizations offer those services to help salvage or soft strip. Haulers and warehousers will need to help us with the logistics of moving and storing materials. And governments and public agencies are really going to help kind of provide that enabling infrastructure and incubate, hopefully, some of the policies and incentives that enable this to happen and make it easier. There are lots of networks and resources out there that I hope we can entice you to tap into and be part of. Recycling and remanufacturing, and then training and education, whether that's both on the ground or in academic institutions to kind of set up the next generation and the next evolution of the workforce. And of course, consulting and research to really dig into some of the things that we just haven't uncovered yet because we haven't explored them. So I want to share a little bit about a resource that I've worked on in collaboration with many people and lots of perspectives. And the goal of it was really to help make some of this work easier and show that there are already real businesses acting in this way that can help us do some of this work. And really it's about sparking new conversations and connections and starting to bridge the gaps between the work we do and the work we'd love to have be the impact of the stores we build. So this is a map, and you guys get to see it kind of 4 days after it's soft launched, gone live, and we'll be happy to share and hope that you kind of start to play with it. But it starts to show just kind of the regional nature of these different markets and these different ecosystems. And the thing about working both in retail, that we work everywhere, but also the idea of working with materials is that they're a physical product that needs to be moved and considered and stored and touched up and reinstalled. And so we do have to take a localized approach. This probably only shows half the database, but the idea is also that it's crowdsourced. And so as it gets geocoded and as more people do this work, it can really start to evolve and grow and show all the different balance of this rainbow that we need to kind of make a circular economy happen. And it's an opportunity to bridge these different kind of specialization toward shared goals. A lot of times these worlds kind of exist and these different networks don't cross paths, but it helps start to bridge kind of sustainable materials management, retail design and construction, and social justice as equitable development can really focus on creating new opportunities because this industry is kind of yet undefined. So here's a couple of local, or at least West Coast examples. You'll see that actually King County Green Tools have a whole website, kind of web page of different resources and explainers and kind of tutorials that you can start to understand what deconstruction is all about. Seattle actually has a salvage assessment that maybe we could start to take as we go on our site survey, start to look around and think about what materials look like they might have value. And then reach out to those local deconstruction contractors or reuse retailers. And let's make this happen. Just try one step at a time. Portland even has their own deconstruction ordinance, although it's more focused on residential, but nothing to stop us from supporting that. So we actually, I think, have some people in the audience here from some of these kind of networks. So hopefully you'll get to meet some of them in the breakout and learn more about their work. But if you don't catch them today, I think Kinley is going to drop this in the chat. But on February 10th, you can kind of learn more about some of the work that's been in action over the past couple of years, especially focused on the Pacific Northwest. So all the happenings with projects and ordinances and incentives. And that's been kind of a team effort between King County, Seattle, and EPA, but kind of a growing and intersecting web of people. So it's really seeing the people behind the work and starting to connect the dots between what has to happen in our industry and communities to make the circular economy real and also inclusive. So I'll kind of wrap up this section just to think about the circular design opportunities that really make retail prime for this. And that's because we do have more short and predictable leases that allow us to plan ahead. And there are so many times that we're involved still kind of and know the project 10 years down the line, whereas it's not something that's been standing for 60 years and you've lost that kind of knowledge of the people who built it originally. The premium and durable products that we use are just valuable in themselves, and the standardized assemblies mean that we know what's going in. We basically know how it's put together, so we should be able to understand how to take it apart. Fit outs being small but kind of geographically dispersed means that one project probably won't overwhelm a market if it's trying to get redistributed, and we can also start to apply lessons learned from one place to another. And truly, I've found it's about long-term relationships between our clients and design teams and vendors and contractors. So we can start to both look together at a portfolio scale and also really build on the lessons learned together. And last but not least, some opportunities in design that we can take on directly in our own scope. So sourcing reuse, designing for disassembly and deconstruction really comes through in a lot of our process, right? Material selection, details and specifications, and demolition plans that maybe then become the roadmap for redistribution. And the most impactful thing we can probably do is to do less, work with existing conditions, and that will have the biggest impact. But we can also leverage some outdoor spaces, obviously contingent on the weather, our climate, and just the site. But that kind of takes away a lot of that need to fit out all of the systems that then are required when we're indoors. So this really helps simplify and enjoy some of the branded spaces without having to kind of fill them in quite as much. Reuse on site and source second life materials, preferably local, as Joy and Michelle mentioned. Designing some spaces that can be reconfigured without having to fully demolish. So that would include like loose and freestanding fixtures, plug and play features like track lighting even, simplifying the materials used in build outs. Like Joy and Michelle said, the more we can minimize either the palette or just the amount of things, both the less we have to track and just the lower the impact there is. Modular design with standard sizes always help just to kind of contribute to all of that. Mechanical attachments also allow for some of that adaptability. Avoiding adhesives also has the benefit of mitigating potential for off-gassing and VOCs. And it helps repairs and maintenance kind of happen with less disruption. So oftentimes I think we've already do these things. And so it's just about realizing these extra benefits and being intentional and proactive about them. A lot of manufacturers are also starting to come up with more creative procurement models. They'll either have end-of-life take-back programs, or they'll offer their products as a service or as kind of a leasing model. So challenge them to take it on. And if those models or programs aren't working or they're not seeing that there's uptake, we can start to find out where those gaps are and help it kind of work for us, hopefully, and also work for them. And last but not least is just start to ask questions and socialize the idea of reuse and deconstruction. You can ask clients about reuse in existing spaces or plan for end of life, kind of looking ahead at what they're installing. Ask those manufacturers if they have take-back programs and find out if their products themselves are designed for disassembly. If you ask contractors how things come apart when they demolish, we might learn some things about our own details. That's usually not when we get to be on site, is kind of seeing how it comes undone if there was something there before. And then learn more about embodied carbon and our local reuse networks. Happy to share that map. And I would say don't underestimate the magic of design. You can change the narrative around reuse, and together we can make it cool and easy. So that's the end of our show. Thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to Jared for Q&A.
Why don't folks turn their videos back on, say hello. There's some cool functionality there in Zoom where folks can give a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and time with us this evening. Such a great presentation. I know that folks have been putting a few questions in the chat. I am going to do my very best to take the questions that Amy's been organizing and put those out for folks, whoever wants to take it. Maybe you can arm wrestle over each question, or you can both take a stab at it. Just one moment. We'll do Q&A, and then we'll do that for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll switch into breakout sessions. So the first one actually came from Amy, and the question was, through the lens of supporting a retail client, what are some tactics y'all recommend of encouraging or maybe persuading said clients to tackle some of these approaches that y'all are suggesting?
I could start. Michelle, you
Sure,
jump
go
in?
ahead. Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I think the first thing is I realized more through kind of the informal conversations that this is just on a personal level. None of us want to see things go to waste. And so I think the more, I think we're still kind of like we're still kind of adapting some and to see where the projects actually take us, but just starting to ask and figuring out ways that it might be able to be simple. That's always going to be kind of the first time managing expectations that it will be complicated. But starting with something that is not going to be super sensitive, I would say, like a branded finish or product, and something that's going to be kind of easy. I don't know, Joy Michelle, go for it.
Yeah, and I think also we can focus on ways that that this can actually save money rather than it's a change in process, but that doesn't mean it's a more expensive process. For instance, recycling and reuse can save money as compared to the price of sending something to a landfill. So focusing on ways that this can be a benefit to the bottom line and also a benefit to the environment. And also I think that more and more companies are issuing ESG reports and corporate sustainability reports, and carbon is an element of that. And the retail stores are the public face of the company, and that's where a lot of the consumers interface with the brand. And those stores need to be a representation of that. And I think we are seeing more clients come to us asking us to do evaluations of their stores because they don't know where they stand in terms of environmental performance. So I think this is something that is changing, and just in the last year or so, we're seeing more and more brands ask for our help evaluating this. So I think it's something that more and more brands are going to ask for if they haven't already. So we can help clients get ahead of the curve.
Continuing from this topic, mentioned sometimes it's not always more expensive. Sometimes it certainly is. How is it that you've seen brands maybe be successful in really maximizing their return on investment in sustainable practices? And in turn, how might they be communicating that to their customers as it relates to this moral imperative of sustainability that is this great challenge?
I think one of the ways to maximize the return on investment is to consider it early and look at it from the beginning of the design of the store. The earlier you consider it, the easier it is to maximize the return on the investment and make sure that it doesn't cost extra. If it's something that you try to add on near the end of the design process, that's where the additional cost usually comes in.
Great. Okay. I think there were some specific questions on waste tickets. It looks like that was answered in the chat. There was also a little bit of conversation about this distinction between demolition and deconstruction. I guess maybe how is it that whether it's consultants or even maybe the client are designating how to communicate what goes, what stays, and how might that be a little different than demo plans?
I think, a lot of times we actually do that anyway. A lot of times it comes up in like a temp store, right? Where the client doesn't want to touch as many things because they're just going in there temporarily, but they're bringing new things in and they're touching some things up. And so we'll already, there are many times that I know we've done that of like relocate this light, salvage this door, reuse this. And so it could be something that's as simple as the notes that we put on our plans. And I think it's kind of the like figuring it out beforehand that is going to be the bulk of the effort, making sure that if you're saying that this is a salvage for donation, the contractor, when they come on site, knows that you've already called who you're donating it to. You know, it's kind of like owner specialty products that they'll either procure ahead of time or they've kind of like figured out before the GC comes on board. And I think that's kind of the legwork that we have to do. The drawing is potentially the easy part.
Cool. Okay. Let's reel back out from maybe some of the tactical aspects of this conversation. Bonnie had a really great one about this moral imperative. So the bigger question, how does a retailer build this into their DNA? So maybe there's an example out there that y'all can reference where a retailer has reinvented themselves somehow, some way. Maybe they weren't so much focused on sustainability in the past, but they took it on and kind of repositioned themselves. And I think going a little bit back to that idea of communicating that ultimately to their customers about their brand as this is being an important thing to them and their customers. Hopefully I paraphrased Bonnie's question a little bit. Okay. Bigger question is, how does the retailer build sustainability into their DNA?
I think there's always there's the visible stuff, and then there's the invisible things that might not be kind of the showy way to do it. And I'll circle back. Maybe I'll start with your second question, and then we can see kind of I'm trying to think of which brands kind of like have a standout turnaround like that. But I think a lot of times, especially when it comes to reuse and circularity, and kind of the fact that that in itself mitigates our impacts on embodied carbon, a lot of things will be done out of a practicality to save money, actually. And so that can be maybe that kind of tip of the iceberg to start to help shift the mindset of like, oh, this is just something that we're doing because we have to, but it also has benefits, and we can start to lean into those benefits to kind of chip away more and more toward kind of more ambitious solutions. When you first were talking about a brand, I was like, well, let's hear about REI, Jared. But I think, yeah, I don't know, for the bad actor turned good.
Yeah, I won't brag about REI. I think we definitely do a good job. I'd say in the built environment, we have plenty of opportunities just like every other retailer. But I'd say we are making really significant headway in our actual product or merchandise. There's some really exciting things happening in the co-op there. I'll go ahead and maybe mention a new brand. I wore my Seattle Kraken hat this evening. While it certainly is a mouthful, Climate Pledge Arena, I think it's gotten a fair amount of flack, but some of that particular facility that was remodeled here in Seattle, super exciting what they've been up to in that space, and literally putting this very idea as the name of the building. Pretty exciting happenings here in the Northwest. Yep. Yeah. Let's see here. Do you have any examples of leveraging your own knowledge in sustainability design where you've been able to make an aspect of a project more sustainable? So I guess, yeah, like personal insights, knowledge, an example of how you've made an impact on a project, and like, what was that like?
Well, I think both of us work with teams throughout CRTKL. And I think where both of us can make an impact is just helping teams brainstorm early in the design process to help teams set sustainable goals and figure out what the potential for projects is. And I think that process early on of evaluating project potential and setting goals is really important. And I think if teams can do that early on, it maximizes the opportunities for performance within the project.
Great. So maybe diving back into a bit of tactics here through like demolition construction. This question comes from Mindy. How often do designers visit a reuse material location online or in person to source materials? I think I saw somebody maybe join from Second Use on the line. I'm not sure if they're still on. For my own house anyways, I am a fanatic of checking their latest inventory every morning personally on the Seattle Second Use website. But yeah, for commercial application retail, finding the good stuff, like what are some tips for designers to know what's out there of available inventory for reuse materials?
I'd love to see if people have kind of their thoughts in the chat too.
Yeah.
How many others have done this? Before we segue into Mindy's next question.
Oh, yeah.
I have a hand up.
Yeah. Stephanie, shoot.
So I just interviewed the design director for Holland America yesterday, and she has her own partners and resources, and she brought up a resource that I think is really valuable and something I never thought of. But on these ships, sometimes you can't just rip out the casework, and like they're in the middle of a dry dock, they have a schedule, they have all the materials that they're going to replace on this ship, and they have a resource called Magic Man, who comes in and literally patches like laminate and like to the point where you can't recognize that it was ever damaged. And I thought, how brilliant is that you might have, you know, a few more years of use out of this instead of ripping it out and replacing it. And I had never heard of this kind of resource, but they're artists is basically what they are. And they come in and they make it happen. So anyways, I just share that with you because that was one I had not heard of before.
Cool. So extending the life of existing assets and service. Any other tips out there? Do a little crowdsourcing. What's the best way to get the good stuff? And I think the follow-up question is, gosh, I found 5, but I need 64.
So part of that, the kind of, you don't get enough. I think that's the big challenge in the commercial market, right? Is the consistency of quality and quantity. And I don't think it's there yet. Like the market's just not there yet. And part of the solution, which I'll credit Andrew Ellsworth, who's a founder of a company called Doors Unhinged, and he focuses just on doors, and that's kind of his ability, his way that he kind of builds up that consistency of that quantity. But it's also to not be a purist, right? So if someone wants to buy 20 doors and he only has 16 that are salvaged, he'll go out and buy those 4 more to kind of complete that package and be able to provide the service of the designer or the person procuring it only having to go to one place to get all their doors, even if he's kind of getting some that are reused and some that are just kind of fresh this time until he can build up that capacity.
Great. Any other questions in the chat that we want to address? We're a little bit over time, so I'm inclined to set up the breakout rooms, but maybe we have time for one more question as I get that set up. Is there something here that folks see in the line? Oh, what about like code enforcement blockades with reuse? When you were mentioning treatment of materials, one of the things I was thinking about was like fire ratings. There's some real nasty stuff often related to those codes. So maybe what are some gotchas in code compliance with reuse of materials?
I see Kinley on the line, so I'm gonna hot potato it to him if he's interested in kind of chiming in. I think hopefully now I'll just like start off, but then Kinley jump in. there's hopefully a dovetail with kind of the healthy materials movement. As we do have more visibility and transparency about what's going into products. I think this is kind of like from here forward. But looking back, it's like you mentioned, Jared, a lot of the fire retardants, flame retardants are not good. And some of those we're still putting in because not everyone knows that they're not good. But
Laura has her hand up. She sounds like
cool.
she might have some color commentary here.
Oh yeah.
Hi, I I work for a contractor, so I have some information that might help. As far as fire ratings, most fire rated doors, it's a system and they have labels on them. You're not supposed to paint over the labels, but most of the time, if it's a hard placard label, you can remove any paint that's been on there. So as long as the system is intact, you can reuse that. And then somebody was asking about costs for waste. Depending on who your agreement is for your waste hauler, it's between about $800 and $1,000 per 30-yard dumpster that goes to a dump.
Yeah.
And then just in case you're interested, there's some materials that are super easy to reuse and repurpose. Doors, reclaimed wood, casework, wood wall panels, acoustical panels, and some carpet tiles are the simplest. So just to throw that out there, it's really easy. You can reface cabinets, you can put a new countertop on it, you can paint the cabinets if they're good quality. So designed for deconstruction or reuse is making sure that we're not using like MDF paneling and it's like you want to specify plywood box for your casework, because then it's much more reusable. Okay, I'll shut up.
Awesome.
Great job, you guys.
So for this raffle, the prize is an enrollment in Healthy Materials CEU program with a value of $140, also sponsored by Wilson Art. This program will give you the right tools to make informed decisions and supply the necessary background information on basic construction materials, their chemical makeups, and their relationship to human health. So let's see who is the winner. Stephanie Dishais.
I think Stephanie's on the line. Yeah.
I am here, but can I gift it to Karen? Because I don't need them.
Yeah.
Karen,
there
you
we
need
go.
I don't need CEU.
No need to use. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks. I'll
Lots
take
of
it.
learning.
I am NCIDQ certified.
And also you can get lead credits for continuous education with this program.
Yeah, it's lead GSBC, I believe, also.
USGBC.
GSBC, yeah.
Awesome.
So congrats. And
Thank
now I will pass it to Toby.
Thank you, Astrid. Yeah, I'm personally very excited about next month's event. We are going to be doing a special presentation about a new concept that my design firm just helped launch last month. We just opened at JFK Terminal 4. The concept is called Treat, and it's owned by the Express Spa Group. If you've seen those at the airport, this is a brand new take on travel, health, and wellness at the airport. So we're going to give you a behind the scenes look. I'm going to have the SVP of marketing for Express Spa Group there with me, and we're going to talk about what inspired Treat, what went into the brand development, and also the store design all the way from concept to execution. So we're really looking forward to sharing that and hope to see you there. And I think that's it for our event. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Thank you again to our sponsors, Wilson Art, Kirsten, I see you on the line. Hi, thank you so much. Thank you all for attending and hope to see you in February.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.